Everybody, Corncod One from National News and Views. Also Kenneth Smith, which is what I have him on my, we share it's on Facebook Messenger where I get his information. Let's go back to really France. I think France is the first big play. Again, the story was Marine Le Pen pretty much had smashed Macron and his party. Macron has been forced now to call the snap elections. I think the first round of that's going to be in about a month away, something like that. So can you go into what are the dynamics that you see happening in France with the nationalist movements?
Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of positive things going on. What's happened over the past 2 or 3 years is that Marine Le Pen, the leader of what used to be called the National Front, now known as National Rally, has very much moderated her party's position on things. So this is good. She called her program de-diabolization, with a kind of a funny name, but that she would moderate the party, and that's good on one level in terms of getting more voters. But the only thing that I'm worried about is that she may become too ridiculously moderate and not do the main thing she was elected for, which was to reduce the third world immigration coming into the country. Now, I hope she keeps her word, but yeah, I mean, it looks very good. I mean, she got well over 30%, 31% in this election, and we're talking about a parliamentary multi-party system. So she dominated all the other parties, including another anti-immigration party, Reconquest, which got 5%, led by a man named Eric Zemmour. So yeah, they are doing very well. It's something that's been gradually happening in France. This is not so much a sudden thing. This goes back to about 1986 when the party was run by her father, Jean-Marie. What they've been doing is just as public opinion against immigration has solidified, the party is gradually over the years, with very few situations where the polls had them going backwards in popularity. It was just a gradual rise, and this was their big year.
Now, when you talked about Le Pen being true to her word, we have another really a disastrous case, and we kind of called it because of who this woman was associated with out of Colorado, some group out of Colorado, which is a globalist organization. I don't recall offhand what it is now, but that is Meloni of Italy. Here's a woman that came on with this, family, Italy, friend, stopping the immigration, and she has become essentially she's taken a shotgun or even bigger, a howitzer to the walls of Italy. We'll get more into that. You hear the break. I think it's a fetch with Corncod One. Back with more right after this. All right, everybody, welcome back. I was just chatting with Dave Gahary, this owner of the station, and he was telling me, I was actually sued by this Posner piece of whatever. Also, I didn't know that. I didn't know. That was news to me. So anyways, Dave, yeah, interesting stuff. Hey, Dave's like me. We get people noticed, man. We get noticed. All right. Going back to the show though. Is Corncod One, again, Kenneth Schmidt. He's, again, National News and Views. He's been with, I'm going to do this on my own. I'm going to do this, Ken. I promise. He's got a bi-monthly column in the British Mag Heritage and Destiny, and he makes regular contributions, again, to the Arctos Journal. 30 years, guys, covering the nationalist movements. And for you, Ken, I would think that really it's a kind of an exciting time, because there's a lot more dynamic activity going on than really there has been that I even remember. You know what I mean? I don't remember anything like this, but we never had this slow communist takeover destroy everything either. So anyways, we were talking about Le Pen. You're saying this is a great positive development. First round is in another month.
Yeah,
the snap
yeah.
elections?
I think slightly less than 7 weeks. It'll be a two-rounder and a runoff, sort of like what we would call in the United States a Louisiana type election.
Okay, and then you were saying, you know, de-villainize is a term that the Le Pen movement was speaking about. They want to de-villainize the movement, try to make it a little bit more mainstream. You were talking about a concern that she becomes so de-villainized that she becomes essentially defanged from what she should be doing. And then we moved over to Maloney, you know, a couple of howitzers or something to the walls of Italy, and just opened up the country to so much immigration and really adopted globalist policies that said she was going to be fighting against. What you read about Maloney? And I'm disappointed.
Yeah, you know, the only real anti-immigration stuff that she actually attempted to do is she does have a minor agreement with the Tunisians and the Albanians to keep like about 30,000 migrants in Albania and in Tunisia on a temporary basis. I mean, that's what even the British Conservative Party is doing. They're trying to do a similar program, but such a thing won't work because we're dealing with too large a numbers. And unfortunately, if a country is a member of the EU, they're under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights. And if they start sending people back or trying to prevent people from coming in, you know, they get a lawsuit in the European Court of Human Rights, and they end up having to let them in, being ordered to do so by the EU. Now, some countries have done a much better job of defying these EU mandates. One of which is Viktor Orban of Hungary, the Prime Minister of Hungary, who's leader of the Fidesz party. He has successfully, for many years, pretty much had a zero immigration policy. Nobody's getting into Hungary. But just this week, a European court started fined him, several million euros, and they're gonna be fine him €1 million a day for every day he keeps third worlders out of Hungary. And they're probably going to do the same thing with another guy who's done really well. He's been in and out of office. Is Robert Fico, otherwise known as Fico, in Slovakia, the Prime Minister of Slovakia.
Fico sounds kind of like my name, Fecho, because then we know it comes from this region. I'm like thinking maybe that was my original family name when they came and they go to Ellis Island. What's your name? It's Fico. Okay, Fecho, that's your name. Thank you. You know?
Yeah, I mean, he's an interesting guy because his party is technically a social democratic party.
But he's recovering from an assassination, right? He's recovering from an assassination.
He was almost killed a couple of weeks ago. Thank God he's doing well. He came very close. The poor man came very close to dying. But even though he runs an ostensibly left-wing party, it's left-wing and also at the same time nationalistic and anti-immigration. And he's actually done a very good job. So I'm getting to the point where I don't know how these prospective nationalist leaders, like, for example, Mrs. Le Pen or Geert Wilders, who's the de facto prime minister of the Netherlands at the moment, I trust him a little more because he's been in the battle for so many years and he's never conceded. But, you don't know how these guys are going to be until they actually get into office and start doing things.
You know, with Geert, the way I see Geert, he's actually an Israeli Zionist, and he is there more to promote the anti-Islam, war on Islam angle than he is an interest in preserving his society. He's got a different agenda. It fits into nationalist objectives and interests, but it's not his motivation. He's trying to create like a war, that war scenario that they talk about in various Jewish eschatological publications, you know, that type of thing. That's my feelings on Gert. That's why I don't like the guy on a personal level, what he's doing. Now let's turn to Germany, then the AFD. What's happening with the AFD? They seem to be doing very well.
With the EU, with the EU elections, Alternative for Germany is, now has the second largest number of seats for Germany in the EU, even beating out the socialists who were under Chancellor Scholz, who are actually in control of the government. So AFD, even though they've been badly persecuted, they keep on. The German Office for the Protection of the Constitution keeps on threatening to ban the party. For many months now, they did very well in the polls, and sure enough, they got 16% of the vote, making them the second most powerful German party in the EU Parliament, and so they've been gradually doing very, very well. Most of their voters are from Eastern Germany. So you do better with countries that have an Eastern European orientation. Some other parties got some. There we are. Some other parties had some success the other day too. Chega, which is the Portuguese word for enough, with an exclamation point. They got an extra seat in the EU Parliament. I think also Vox, led by the Nationalist Party in Spain, led by Santiago Abascal. I think he picked up a couple of seats.
Okay, how are we doing then in the Nationalists? Now that you're mentioning this, I'm just kind of curious. How are the Nationalists doing right now in the EU as far as the EU Parliament itself? Where are the Nationalists sitting right now as far as the number of seats and how many seats are in the EU Parliament?
Well, I can't give you a number offhand, but unfortunately, the EU is dominated by a center right. A center right that really isn't a center right. What's it called? The EPP, under that van der Leyen woman. And she's the head person now at the EU. She's like the presiding officer of the EU. But now that these elections have come, we're still, the center right will still dominate, unfortunately, the EU Parliament. But we have come to a situation where there are unfortunately two different party groupings that nationalist parties are sailing under, because you have to sort of assign yourself to a group of parties in the EU Parliament. You don't just represent your political party from home. So there's two somewhat nationalistic and somewhat conservative party groupings, and there's a little bit of unfortunately, there's a little bit of a division there, and some like, for example, Hungary's Fidesz party people are non-affiliated. So there isn't unfortunately a kind of a unified front in the European Parliament, which is not the best situation. But by far, we now have the most nationalistic people in the European Parliament that's ever been there before, by far.
What's your take then All right. I think I
Oh,
am
there we
still
are.
here.
I can hear you now.
There we are. Yeah, I keep spinning. I'm getting kicked off and then kicked on again. So I think we are okay now.
I think so too.
It's checking. Yeah, I'm going out. I'm going fine. Okay, so fine. Okay, great. So the AFD, I want to go over now to Yusuf Hamza. I think he resigned. He put in his hate speech crime law that saw like 8,500 complaints in the first day, some ridiculous figure like that. He's resigning, or did he resign? Are you versed in anything what's going on up in Scotland right now?
Well, yeah. I mean, in Scotland, unfortunately, there's no real nationalistic party running for the Scottish Parliament, and so there really isn't any mechanism in Scotland for people to fight back. I mean, even Ireland now has a national party, even though it's small and weak. At least they have one. In Scotland, there's nothing. It's such a left wing place. And I'm not disparaging Scottish people, since I have relatives from there. So
yes. Yeah, a lot of us are like, even me, I went to school with some relatives, not relatives, but the McElhaney clan, and they were deeply Scottish. I mean, sometimes I couldn't understand the father when he spoke. He was still like first generation Scot. And it's like, dude, I can't understand what your dad's saying, man. It's too much of an accent for me. Sweden, the Nordic resistance movements today or this week classified as an extremist group, racially motivated group. Did you hear about that story?
Well, yeah. I mean, Sweden is doing okay. The Sweden Democrats are actually part of the coalition that runs Sweden. I don't think they've done anything really notable so far. They always had to be, by the nature of the situation in that country. The Sweden Democrats have always had to been sort of forced almost to be an extremely moderate party. And like over the years, until they got elected in 2022 as the leading member of a coalition, they really haven't been able to get much of their agenda ahead. Also, by the way, since we're talking about Scandinavia, the Finns party, which is the mildly nationalistic party in Finland, they did terrible in EU elections. They lost seats. One of the few countries in Europe where a nationalistic party lost seats in the EU election. And Norway, unfortunately. Norway has something called the Progress Party, but maybe about 10 years ago, the Progress Party made some minor progress, if you forgive the expression, but since then they've been dead. And as far as Denmark goes,
okay,
what's that?
Yeah, okay, go ahead, Denmark. The round table is good for me, so yeah, go ahead.
Well, in Denmark is kind of interesting. Yeah, they do have a couple of very tiny nationalistically inclined parties that are pretty new, so they need time to develop. One of them is something actually very much close to the Progress Party in Norway. One of the positive things, though, is that some of the left-wing parties in that country, in order to weaken the right, have actually taken some very mild but real legal actions to lessen the amount of third world immigration. So in Denmark, it's not too bad.
When you look at then this Kalergi plan, let's be honest, I think a lot of people, even the normies now, are starting to understand this is an actual plan to replace the population of Europe, And it's being done by apparatchiks. It's not being done by the people. Nobody's voting for this. You just got some administrative acts. Some are deciding for the entire continent that this is what's going to happen to you. And people are waking up to that. Is there some hope for Europe, or is this really, we are too late in the game, too many facts on the ground, without perhaps maybe a civil war that would clean up a lot of the blood, so to speak?
Yeah, well, I think we've made a lot of progress since I started writing about this in the very early 90s. I think we've made progress, because I remember I used to breathlessly report in one of my columns, if a nationalistic party got 2 or 3 seats in a regional parliament in Germany or some other country. So now we're talking about parties that are on the edge of power. Now, of course, there's going to be problems. You're going to have people like Giorgia Meloni stab us in the back. You're going to have people that are going to sell out, and it's kind of inevitable. So I think what's going to happen is, for a lot of those countries where they elect a party like Fratelli d'Italia in Italy, which is Miss Meloni's party, and after a few years they do nothing, well, then there are other parties people can go to, like the much more radical in the future Fiamma Tricolore, or in France you have Reconquest, which is Eric Zemmour's party, which also has a reasonable number of very militant people. So in a lot of those countries, there are more radical parties that can take over if these current, what they're called, national conservative parties fail. So I think there's a possibility over time we can develop kind of an elite. Marianne Maréchal Le Pen, another Le Pen relative, the niece of the great man, she actually started an institute. The French have this institute educational system where you take college graduates, but you send them then to one of these institutes, and these institutes groom you to be part of the establishment. So what Marianne Michel Le Pen is trying to do is she's trying to groom leaders of the future for nationalist movements in France and in other European countries. So I'm cautiously optimistic, because the voters are angry, and I think it's trickling down. We might have what the Italian elitist theories have called a circulation of elites, whereby elites don't last forever. They can be replaced by other elites. So yeah, but unfortunately, it may take time, and time in a lot of ways is what we don't have. We certainly don't have it in the United States, as you can imagine, as we're headed toward actually a sort of a corporate leftist dictatorship. Now that we've decided to start locking up the opposition.
Yeah, that's a scary thought, actually. It's a scary thought.
Poor Mr. Bannon is,
yes, my goodness,
probably going into prison this week, for example. And whether or not one likes or dislikes Trump, the very fact that they're locking up the opposition in the United States now, I'm a pessimistic guy, but I never thought it would get that bad so quick.
A lot of us we blame Trump. You know what I mean? Dude, you had the power, you had everything, but you let it slide. You're too nice to everybody. You think you can negotiate your way out of everything. And these guys that you're up against, they don't negotiate. There is no negotiation with these guys. There is their way, and there's the only way. And if they don't like it, then they're going to keep power. And now you've got the elections coming up. We have all this problem with the southern border. We've got the fentanyl. We've got the destruction of so much of the American economy. And it's like, where's the opposition? MAGA's huge. Let's be honest, Kenneth. MAGA's huge, but are they aware enough and intelligent enough to understand the game? I'm not convinced, because Trump, in my opinion, keeps them in the dark.
Yeah, frankly, at this point, I think the best route, and I gave a speech in England back last September, that it looks like state sovereignty in the United States is probably the best thing we can go for, where we can stitch together a coalition of several governors and just defy the central government in Washington and see how it goes. But as far as the Republican Party, it's not much of an instrument. There's probably about 25 guys in the House of Representatives and maybe 5 fellows in the Senate that are worth a bucket of warm spit. And I was sort of pleased the other day, though. Marjorie Taylor Greene put in an amendment to a bill which would have defunded NATO, and 47 Republicans voted for it. I thought that was a sort of a significant victory, just that number itself. But like most Republican elected officials in this country are useless.
Yeah, they got to go see their AIPAC guy. What'd you think of Massey? Maybe we keep you, if you don't mind, staying another half hour. What'd you think of Massey's comments with Tucker about, so many Republicans have their AIPAC guy. And AIPAC has been, not AIPAC, but like the AIPAC of Australia. Guy's written a book about how the same thing is going on inside of Australia. It seems to me like there is a concerted effort at some senior level to get the word out about just how dangerous this entire Israeli operation is to the Republic.
Yeah, and it's well, it's the best of times and the worst of times. I think the America First concept is gaining ground with young Republicans, young conservatives, young nationalistically inclined conservatives in the United States. So I think a lot of people that'll be pulling the lever for Trump in November, even though unfortunately he's a hardened Zionist. I think a lot of the Trump supporters are really taking up the America First theme. But it's very hard because, for example, I live, even though my origins are in the suburbs of New York City on the Jersey side, here in the Deep South, where people are primarily very conservative otherwise, because of the dispensationalism, everyone is pro-Israeli.
So that, I understand this, Ken, and that means that people like a Trump, although to me, he's just a hardened Zionist. It doesn't matter. But it seems to me like a lot of these politicians have to appeal to that bloc. Stay over if you don't mind. Otherwise.
Oh, yeah, happy to.
All right, great. All right, Kenneth Smith again will be staying over with the break, and it's the Fetch Inside the Eye Live. Banjo time coming up. All right, everybody, welcome back. It's the Fetch Inside the Eye Live. Ken, I don't know if you listen to the show all the time. I do know that we get your information, and that's always appreciated. I like your work. And but Banjo Time means it's the final segment of the show. Now, I turned 62, Ken, just this past week, and I promised some of the listeners that I would share some of the karaoke time with them. And so we have one more clip to play. So just bear with it. It ain't bad. It's not so bad. And then we're going to get right back to the interview. So hang tight.
No problem. No problem.
This the line. Good morning, America. How are ya? Don't you know me? I'm your native son. That kind of does something to you when you're an expat, Ken, because you're out of the country so long. And that line is like, don't you know me? I'm your native son. It kind of makes you feel a little bit homesick, a little bit. That may sound kind of strange, but it actually does. It actually kind of makes you feel, geez, you're not there anymore. It's like, wow, it's been 15 years. So anyways, that song kind of hits you when you sing it. But I'm going to put these clips are going to go on my Telegram page. You can go at Radio ITEL. I will put 3 or 4 clips of the videos. You can see the actual party, the singing, and just gives you a little incentive to come on over to at Radio ITEL on Telegram. And I will upload those after the show tomorrow. It's almost 2:00 here locally. So we will leave it at that. So, all right. Kenneth Smith again is back for extended segment. Normally keep it for only half an hour again. He's a bi-monthly columnist for the British magazine Heritage and Destiny, and a regular contributor to the Arctos Journal. So we're talking a lot about the European elections. We now moved pretty much over to what's more on our minds, the United States and what's happening with MAGA. So, Ken, we have a huge problem at the border. MAGA, as you and I think we both, I agree with you. I believe we got a similar idea. The young people are taking up the MAGA. Where do you see Americans turning? I hear support for Israel in America is only like at 46% now. It's dropping among some of the demographics. What is happening now with this whole genocide? And it is a genocide. It's just wanton slaughter by the Israelis. So what's happening with opinion in America right now? I hear it's like changing even in the media. We're getting a lot of different views than we might have got 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think opinions are changing. I don't think they're changing rapidly, but they are changing slowly. I think a lot of from a humanitarian impulse, a lot of people, in terms of the fact that it really does look as if the Israelis are committing genocide in Gaza. They're actually trying to dispossess and destroy a people, and people are beginning to sort of understand that. There was a time in the United States where almost nobody dissented from the Israeli lobby. They had complete control. I've listened to some funny quotes from Netanyahu saying, "Oh, don't worry, we control the Americans. The Americans are no problem." I mean, even Biden, or his handlers, have had to sort of try to hold back the Israelis a little bit. Even they have been trying to hold back the Israelis a bit in terms of the atrocities. It's not working, of course. So they no longer have a complete hold on the American people. I mean, they still control Congress and all the major institutions. But I think as a general matter, I think they're failing with the American people, and that's going to have political consequences down the road. Maybe not right away, but in the years to come.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that, especially amongst the youngsters. What I find annoying, Ken, and maybe you can relate to this or not, but what happens is that whenever we criticize Israel, Donald Trump and this established right-wing Zionist fanatic element, they immediately throw us into the same bank, the same group as Rashid Tlaib or Ilhan Omar. This group is like, you know what? Screw you guys. We have our own opinions. Maybe we can agree with these people. That's okay. That's politics. But don't just throw us in with these people as if just to diminish everything about us. This level of let's say the Trump angle just really disgusts me about what he's doing on a political level, because it's not like he is the genius of the, you know what I mean, the genius intellectual elite of America. A lot of us are a lot smarter than this guy, if you know what I mean.
Oh, sure. I think I'm convinced that I think the Israeli lobby is losing. The Zionist lobby is losing in the United States. I think people are seeing how ruthless they are on how much they want to manipulate public opinion in the United States and shout down
You got a question.
even people with minor quibbles. What's that?
Yeah, like all these laws, like, making anti-Semitism basically like it's a federal crime. What the hell is this? To me, that's a declaration of war by the Israeli people against the American citizens. Who are you to tell us what to say? Your hands are in our pockets, not our hands in your pocket. Your hands are in my pocket. Shut up and we will talk as we want.
I mean, even I'm surprised that those anti-BDS laws in the United States have no one's ever seemed to have won a lawsuit against them, because what they are essentially is a limitation on speech. And if I want to start a boycott against a certain company or country, I'm free to do it.
And freedom of association. Who are you to tell me I got to associate with these flakes? Who are you? So the whole thing to me on an adult level is just in your face nonsense. It's like a bunch of punks telling us we can't do something. It's like, and we're supposed to cower. And I don't get it.
Yeah, well, it's the donor class, really. The Sheldon Adelsons of this world. The politicians are so, because I used, for a decade of my life, I was deeply involved in the practical side of politics within the Republican Party before I became a hardcore Paleo-Conservative or a Nationalist. I was involved in the regular conservative movement, and I regret that. But I used to be an aide, an informal aide to a state senator, and I was his right hand man, his Paulie Walnuts, so to speak, since it was in New Jersey. And I would greet him when I walked into his office, and I'd say, "Hey, John, how's it going?" I could say that, he's deceased now, and he'd say, "I'm raising money." And as Tip O'Neill used to say, money is the mother's milk of politics, and so a lot of it comes from these these Jewish donors, and that's how they control these guys.
So Jews really they invest that much money in politics just to control everything.
Yeah, it's very sentimental. Now, one thing even a lot of my fellow nationalists and right wingers are not talking about is I think the Israeli lobby is probably, or what you might say the Jewish lobby is the main are the main people behind the Ukraine thing.
100%.
Yeah, because
100%.
I mean, the president of the country happens to be of the Jewish race. The guy who controls the president, a man by the name of Kolomoisky, he's a Jewish gentleman. And it's like, I think that's one of the reasons why we have this unconditional support of Ukraine. I know there's other reasons, like all these politicians getting their sons and daughters on corporate boards and money laundering. But yeah, there's like a big Jewish lobby thing involved. And of course, they don't really care about the poor Ukrainian people. 400,000 dead Ukrainian soldiers. Nobody speaks for them when we encourage them to get on the road to NATO membership and precipitate a war. Nutty.
You know, it's interesting too. Is I think in 1996 you had the head of Schneerson, I believe, was still alive, head of the. Maybe he wasn't, but I think it was 1996, talking about how it's going to be so easy for Jewish people to manipulate Ukraine, and they will be fighting the Russians, and the Ukrainians are basically going to depopulate it, and we're going to get our new Israel. And yet nobody talks about this issue. I mean, this guy like predicted it in 1996. This is what they're going to do. And now
Yeah, I find it
Tucker
like
Carlson
I find
even-
it unimaginable the fact that the Jewish president of the Ukraine and his backers are on the same side of Ukrainian National Socialists. It's truly bizarre. Sometimes I've been studying politics for a long time. Sometimes politics do indeed make strange bedfellows, but oops.
Your light turned off.
Politics are make
lighting is
strange
good for video.
bedfellows. But I think that may be the strangest case of bedfellows ever.
Well, and to me, they're just LARPing as Nazis. They're actually just Zionists LARPing as Nazis. They're in Israel kissing the screwing the Wailing Wall, just as every U.S. politician is. They go to Israel, they go to the whole process. They're just LARPing. It's like they're actors. To me, it's just one giant acting scene to depopulate Ukraine, make problem for Russia, which is really not a problem. I think the Russians are kind of sad, because they know they're killing a lot of fellow Russians. It's kind of like, but they know they don't have a choice. The Jewish media is so strong at programming people that they will do the bidding of Jewish people. We saw it in World War II. We saw it in Vietnam. We saw it in Iraq. And now, unfortunately, it's happening to the Ukrainians, and nobody's waking up to the real fact that the one people that don't have any repercussions are the media. They get away with murder, literally, or creating the conditions that create mass murder across the planet. Yeah. So, fake news is fake news, but it's not solving the problem. We have to take them to heart. What about civil war in the U.S.? Do you hear any rumblings about that in any circles? In your circles?
Yeah, I mean, I do. Because I have been an advocate for the independence of various states, like Texas. The Texas independence movement is really very well organized and very well led, by the way. But I don't think we're at a point right now where people are interested in a civil war situation in the United States. I think things are going to have to get worse economically. I think people.
How are we at now? Where are we at now? Where are we at now? On the economic front.
I think our situation is bad, and I think bad times are coming. I think what's going to happen is they're probably going to let the stock market free fall after the election, after they get rid of Trump or imprison him or assassinate him or get rid of him in some other method. They're not going to let this gentleman become president. I don't care.
You and many others are telling me the same thing. They are not going to let Trump be president. They're either going to kill him, they're going to decide he's not going to be president. So many people are telling me exactly what you're saying. And that's a dangerous situation.
Oh yeah, I mean, we're no longer, at least on the federal level, living in a republic in the United States. We're living in a, sort of an oligarchic dictatorship. And I think over time they're going to continue to chip away at free speech rights, and then we're going to go from authoritarian to totalitarian, and I think that'll be fairly fast.
Maybe another year, 2 years.
Once
this election is finalized.
Yeah, once they get Trump out of the way, and they can be confident at never having a real dissenter as president, they're really going to start tightening the screws.
Is Trump legitimate or is he fake opposition?
Who? I'm sorry.
Is Trump legitimate, or is he fake opposition? The reason I ask is that when you had Yuri Bezmenov, he came out and said, look, the final stage is when we present you with your savior, but in reality, he is there to give us everything we need to complete the coup. And is Trump one of these guys that kind of fits that model? I mean, he gave them everything on COVID. He gave them everything on the vaccine mandates. He gave them everything they wanted. He gave them the ventilators. He caved. He gave them everything. So is this guy like really intelligent enough to be that opposition, or is he just being used? His vanity is being used. Yeah, he's got his MAGA movement, but that can be, they can get rid of that, and you're going to be our hero, and we're going to get everything we want from you.
I think Trump is what he is, which from the very beginning, and I supported Trump, from the very beginning I said, this man can only be a transitional figure at best. I definitely don't see him as the nation's savior. I don't see him as the leader of a political movement that can be successful. On the other hand, I don't necessarily think that he's a puppet of the establishment. I think he's a man who is not very ideological. I think what he did was, I understand there's some proof of this. Years ago when he was running against Buchanan for the Reform Party nomination, believe it or not, I was a minor official in the Reform Party for a while. I think he saw a lot of what Buchanan was doing in terms of immigration, in terms of trade. So I think he borrowed some ideas from the Paleo-Conservative movement in the United States, which was sort of reaching its high point at that time. But in a lot of other ways, he's a typical New York liberal. So he's kind of like a mix. And like I say, at best, he's a transitional figure to something better. Like, for example, the guy that changed Italian politics in the 90s was Silvio Berlusconi. I think you can make a really good, Mr. Berlusconi died about a year ago, but where Berlusconi was somewhat populist, was able to play nice with nationalistic parties, which a lot of other Italian politicians weren't. So, like Berlusconi, he's a transitional guy.
Now, the problem I see, I think, that's just good observation. I mean, that's got to hear these ideas to think, right? But I think Orban is a good figure. Poland seems to be, I don't know. Russia seems to be reasonably secure, actually. I mean, it's a diverse nation by its very nature. But the Kremlin isn't just giving up power to whatever, you know what I mean? You ain't going to be, just because you're diverse, you're going to come into the Kremlin. They guard the Kremlin very, very well, if you know what I mean. That's my take on Russian politics. You just don't come in and just get access to the Kremlin, that type of thing. China, of course, is very nationalistic now, exceedingly. Japan, we see growing nationalism. Philippines, we're seeing it here. Saudi has been nationalist for quite some time. It's good to see what they're doing. So really, it's just the West. In the West, we're led by these globalist, communist, really idiots. And how do we get rid of them?
Yeah, well, see, that's the thing. I think, politics is downstream of culture. I think the culture is changing.
Interesting statement. I never thought of that.
In the West, and this is true, I've seen statistics both in the United States for somebody like Trump and the statistics in Europe, the voting statistics, is that men are moving to the so-called far-right parties. They aren't really all that far-right necessarily. But they're moving toward people like Trump, and they're moving to far-right parties. Women are moving further left. in general. And I think the fact that a lot of young men in the United States are unable to marry because of the divorce system and the anti-male discrimination that's all over the place now. I could give you examples even from my own life. So men are very disaffected, and you don't want millions and millions of angry and disaffected young men. Angry and disaffected young men form revolutionary movements, both of the violent and nonviolent kind. So, I'm looking ahead with a sort of a cautious optimism, because our opposition, sometimes they're very smart and sometimes they're dumb.
Yeah. How much weight do you put on, because you hear about the generational, let's just say the generational, what's the word I'm looking for? Discontent or whatever. That's not really the word. But, you hear a lot of the boomers, right? They vilify the boomers. But how much subsurface is going on to where really the knowledge we do have, and it's extensive, is really getting passed down? Do you see this happening, even though we publicly, the boomers, and yeah, there's a problem with boomer culture. Trump's one of them, but nonetheless, how much of this is really being passed down from us and our later generation Xers to really say, guys, this is how it is. I know I do it. The show does it. How much is happening out there?
It's funny. I've been just in recent weeks, great minds think alike. I've been thinking deeply about that very thing. You'll notice that I write for a British magazine, that I write for the Arctos Journal, which is published I think it's in Budapest now, but it's run by Swedes. I get along better with European nationalists because the young American nationalists are extremely generational. Since I'm a baby boomer, I'm approaching my mid-60s. They don't want to have anything to do with me on the far right in the United States. That was never a phenomenon until 7 or 8 years ago. So there is a big generational divide.
Ken, this was actually started by the younger influencers of the quote unquote far right, people like the Red Ices, which were big. They were like very anti-boomer. And so it's like the supposedly nationalist leaders, influencers were like harming their own interests. It's like, and you wonder, are these really people that stupid, or are they just trying to make a name and become popular because it's easy to just slap other people without understanding the dynamics?
You know what it is? It's stereotypes. For example, I can tell you, I didn't go to Woodstock. I've never smoked marijuana in my life. I never played a guitar in a rock and roll band.
Oh, you missed a lot.
I from the time I was knee high off the ground till this very day, I go to church every Sunday. So it's like I've lived a very socially conservative life. So I'm definitely not the boomer stereotype of the sort of neo hippie of the 1970s or anything like that. But they have this the alt-righters started it. And
that's correct. That's correct.
Yep. The alt-righters have done a good job in a lot of other ways. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
That's okay. We have like a minute
to go. Good job in a lot of
30
other
seconds to go.
They are very heavily into this generational thing.
And with that, And we're going to leave it. I think that's a great discussion point because it was also part of a Ranger graduation ceremony for Philippine Rangers this week. That was one of the discussions. So this is now making it into the discussion. So rather interesting. Ken, thanks for staying the extra time. Great to hear you. Great to see you. All right, everybody. Hi, this is The Fetch from Inside the Eye Live, coming to you from the Philippines, where I'm on vacation for a bit of spell here while we get back to our normal show from the Middle East. If you like this latest content, please feel free to share it across your platforms. And, of course, be sure to come visit us every Saturday morning at 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern on speakfreeradio.com or at my website, InsideTheEyeLive.com, where, again, you'll find interactive chat, listener call-in lines, and, of course, some of the latest and breaking information on some of the really cultural issues that are affecting us all today in the West. So thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you again soon. Thanks.